Officer Jones had been on the night shift for years and thought he had seen it all. One night, while patrolling a quiet suburban neighborhood, he received a call about strange noises coming from a vacant house. The house had been abandoned for months, and neighbors occasionally reported odd sounds or lights. Jones arrived at the location and saw that the front door was ajar. Drawing his flashlight and weapon, he entered cautiously. The air inside was thick with dust, and cobwebs hung from the ceiling. He called out, but there was no response. As he moved from room to room, he felt an unsettling presence, as if someone was watching him. In the living room, he found old furniture covered with sheets. As he swept his flashlight across the room, he saw a figure standing in the corner, partially obscured by the shadows. Jones commanded the figure to show their hands, but it remained motionless. When he approached, the figure vanished before his eyes. Suddenly, he heard footsteps behind him. Spinning around, he saw nothing but the open doorway. He checked the entire house, but found no one. Shaken, he exited the house and reported his findings. Despite thorough investigations, no one could explain the phantom figure or the footsteps. Jones still avoids that house during his patrols. Detective Harris had a reputation for solving cold cases. One particular case involved a serial killer who had died in prison under mysterious circumstances. The killer, known as the Butcher, had always vowed revenge on Harris for putting him behind bars. One night, Harris was working late at the station, going through old files. The lights flickered, and he heard a whisper behind him. Turning around, he saw nothing. Shrugging it off as fatigue, he continued working. Suddenly, his office door slammed shut. He jumped up, drawing his gun, and checked the hallway. Empty. Returning to his desk, he found the case file of the Butcher open, even though he had just closed it. Photos of the victims were scattered across the desk. As he gathered them, the temperature in the room dropped sharply. He heard the whisper again, clearer this time. "You're next." Harris felt a cold hand on his shoulder and spun around, but no one was there. The lights flickered again, and he saw a shadowy figure at the end of the hall. He gave chase, but the figure disappeared. Harris couldn't shake the feeling that the Butcher had somehow returned to haunt him, seeking the revenge he had promised. Detective Harris had a reputation for solving cold cases. One particular case involved a serial killer who had died in prison under mysterious circumstances. The killer, known as the Butcher, had always vowed revenge on Harris for putting him behind bars. One night, Harris was working late at the station, going through old files. The lights flickered, and he heard a whisper behind him. Turning around, he saw nothing. Shrugging it off as fatigue, he continued working. Suddenly, his office door slammed shut. He jumped up, drawing his gun, and checked the hallway. Empty. Returning to his desk, he found the case file of the Butcher open, even though he had just closed it. Photos of the victims were scattered across the desk. As he gathered them, the temperature in the room dropped sharply. He heard the whisper again, clearer this time. "You're next." Harris felt a cold hand on his shoulder and spun around, but no one was there. The lights flickered again, and he saw a shadowy figure at the end of the hall. He gave chase, but the figure disappeared. Harris couldn't shake the feeling that the Butcher had somehow returned to haunt him, seeking the revenge he had promised. Officer Daniels had heard stories about the old asylum on the outskirts of town. It had been abandoned for decades, but rumors persisted about strange sounds and sightings. One night, he was assigned to check the perimeter after reports of trespassers. Daniels arrived and found the gates chained and locked. He walked the fence line, shining his flashlight through the bars. As he reached the back of the property, he heard faint cries for help. He called out, but there was no response. Climbing over the fence, he entered the grounds. The cries grew louder, leading him to a boarded-up building. He pried open a window and climbed inside. The air was thick with decay, and the cries seemed to echo from the walls. Following the sounds, Daniels reached a long corridor lined with cells. The cries stopped abruptly. He shone his flashlight into the cells, finding them empty. As he turned to leave, he saw a figure standing at the end of the corridor, a patient in a tattered gown. The figure whispered, "Help us," before disappearing into thin air. Daniels rushed out of the building, shaken. He reported his experience, but no evidence of anyone being there was found. The cries and the figure haunted his dreams for months. Officer Stevens was dispatched to a historic mansion after the owner reported hearing strange noises from the attic. The mansion had a dark history, with rumors of hauntings dating back to the 19th century. Stevens arrived and spoke with the owner, who claimed to hear footsteps and voices at night. He climbed the narrow staircase to the attic, his flashlight casting eerie shadows on the walls. The air grew colder as he reached the top. In the attic, Stevens found old furniture covered in dust and cobwebs. He called out, but received no reply. As he moved deeper into the space, he heard soft whispers and the distinct sound of footsteps behind him. He turned, but saw no one. Suddenly, an old rocking chair in the corner began to move on its own. Stevens approached cautiously, and as he did, the whispers grew louder. He felt a cold breeze pass by, and the chair stopped rocking. The whispers ceased. Convinced that the mansion was haunted, Stevens left the attic and reported his findings. The owner decided to move out, unable to live with the presence in the attic. Stevens never forgot the feeling of being watched and the eerie whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. Officer Green was patrolling a rural area late at night when he saw a car parked on the side of a rarely used road. He pulled over to investigate and found the car empty, with the doors open and the engine still running. Green called for backup and began searching the surrounding woods. As he walked, he noticed that the trees and landscape seemed oddly familiar, as if he had been there before. He tried to retrace his steps, but found himself back at the car, which now had all its doors closed. Confused, he continued searching, only to end up at the car again. This time, there were footprints leading from the car into the woods. He followed them, but they ended abruptly in a clearing with no signs of struggle or further tracks. As he stood there, his radio crackled with static, and he heard his own voice calling for help. Panicking, he ran back to the car and radioed for assistance, but the signal was weak. He decided to wait by the car until backup arrived. When his colleagues finally reached him, they found Green in a state of shock. He couldn't explain the time loop or how he kept returning to the same spot. The car's occupants were never found, and Green was left with a sense of unease and confusion that never fully went away. Detective Martinez was assigned to a series of disturbing break-ins. The intruder left no signs of forced entry and took nothing but rearranged personal items and left eerie notes saying, "I'm watching you." Martinez interviewed the victims, all of whom reported feeling watched even before the break-ins. One night, while reviewing case files at home, Martinez heard a noise outside his window. He grabbed his gun and cautiously approached, but saw nothing. Over the next few days, he noticed small changes in his home. Items moved, lights left on, and windows unlocked. Martinez set up surveillance cameras, determined to catch the stalker. The footage showed a shadowy figure entering his home, but the face was always obscured. One night, Martinez woke to find the figure standing at the foot of his bed. He reached for his gun, but the figure vanished. Reviewing the footage, he saw himself sleeping while the figure stood over him, watching for hours. The intrusion stopped abruptly, but Martinez was left with the haunting memory of the stalker and the feeling of being watched. Despite his best efforts, he never caught the person responsible, and the case remained unsolved. Officer Blake was assigned to patrol a cemetery after reports of vandalism and strange sightings. He arrived just before midnight and began his rounds, flashlight in hand. The cemetery was eerily quiet, with a heavy mist hanging over the graves. As Blake walked among the tombstones, he heard faint whispers. He paused, listening, but couldn't make out the words. The whispers grew louder, seeming to come from all around him. He called out, but no one answered. Suddenly, he saw a figure dart behind a mausoleum. Blake gave chase, but when he rounded the corner, the figure was gone. He searched the area thoroughly, but found no signs of anyone. The whispers continued, more insistent now. Blake decided to wait by his patrol car until his shift ended. As he sat in the car, he saw a figure standing among the graves, watching him. He shone his flashlight on it, but the figure disappeared. When his relief arrived, Blake reported his experiences. The other officers dismissed it as a prank or his imagination, but Blake knew what he had seen and heard. He requested a transfer, unable to shake the feeling that something in the cemetery was watching him. Officer Carter was driving down a deserted road late at night when he saw a young woman hitchhiking. She looked distressed, so he pulled over and offered her a ride. She thanked him and got in, explaining that her car had broken down. As they drove, Carter noticed she seemed unusually quiet. When he glanced at her in the rearview mirror, she was gone. Panicked, he stopped the car and searched the area, but there was no trace of her. Carter returned to the station and reported the incident. His colleagues told him about the legend of the vanishing hitchhiker, a ghostly figure that appeared to stranded travelers. He had always dismissed such stories as myths, but now he wasn't so sure. The experience left Carter questioning his own senses and wondering if he had encountered a spirit seeking help or if it was just a figment of his imagination. Officer Davis was sent to investigate reports of lights and noises coming from an abandoned school. The building had been empty for years, following a tragic accident that claimed the lives of several students and teachers. Davis entered the school and was immediately struck by the sense of sadness and loss that permeated the halls. As he walked through the dark corridors, he heard the faint sound of children laughing and running. Following the sounds, he reached the old gymnasium. The lights flickered on, revealing ghostly figures of children playing. They didn't seem to notice him, continuing their game as if unaware of his presence. Davis watched in awe and fear as the ghostly children played. Suddenly, the lights went out, and the gymnasium was plunged into darkness. The sounds of laughter ceased, replaced by a chilling silence. When the lights came back on, the figures were gone. Davis left the school, shaken by what he had witnessed. He reported his experience, but no one believed him. The abandoned school remained a place of sorrow and mystery, with Davis haunted by the memory of the ghostly children and their eerie game. If you enjoyed this horror stories, Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more chilling stories. Share your thoughts and any eerie experiences you've had in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay curious and stay safe.